We'll just wait a minute, ma'am.
Yeah.
They're all joining in. Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon to all the participants of today's INLIT webinar series. It feels great to be a part of yet another learning session organized by INLIT Academy on the topic An Introduction to Archetypal Literary Criticism, reading Eliot's Wasteland. Yes, dear participants, one of the most well-known works of literature, The Wasteland. Every reader across ages and culture learns valuable lessons from his wonderful piece of literature. Like Shakespeare, what's that uniqueness that made it stand the test of time? You might wonder. To aid us decipher this, it's my pleasure presenting today's resource person, Dr. Lois Jose, Assistant Professor, Sri Ayyappa College, Kerala. As the outcome of Dr. Lois' research in her areas of specialization, English language, literature, and folk tales, she has published several research articles titled Folk Tales in Modern Society, Can Folk Tales Validate History, Folk Tales and Indigenous Culture, Traditional Myths Through Modern Lenses, Role of Teaching in E-Learning, and few others as well. Her research on Tibetan myths, folk tales, and culture should be highlighted. Besides, Ma'am has also enriched her learning through her participation in many workshops, seminars, conferences, and certificate courses. I hope an interesting and knowledge-enhancing teaching-learning interaction is awaiting, and without any more delay, let's get ready to listen to Dr. Lois. Ma'am, thank you, ma'am. You can start.
Thank you, INLIT Academy. I bring warm greetings from Kerala to all who are listening me today. And I'm so happy to be with you all this afternoon. I thank all the well-wishers of this academy and the people behind this initiative for making me a part of this effort. I have heard a lot about INLIT Academy, and my friends actually have presented one or two papers in this. So it's actually a much happy moment and a proud moment for me also to be part of this. The fear that grasped all of us during the past 9 months is slowly losing its grip. The pandemic, the quarantine, the lockdown, all those concepts and the terms became so familiar to us. Probably this was the time if you had observed, we heard this endless times about the stories that we are nearing some end time. Or you might have also heard the motivation quotes like the Shelley's quotes repeatedly. If winter comes, can spring be far behind? Or we shall overcome this too. So these ideas of end times or death and rebirth were occurring in our thoughts, in our speeches, in our talks, in our stories. Doesn't matter where we are going to speak, whether it is a friendly talk or a bedtime talk, or we are going to give a huge lecture, a huge debate or discourses. Probably if you have observed, almost every talk during these days started with that COVID-19 pandemic. We might have also heard a lot of end time narrations made in religions, its interpretations. And this was so common, not just in Kerala, maybe not in Tamil Nadu. It was, if you observed, it is common in almost all the societies, irrespective of your state, national boundaries, linguistic boundaries, cultures. In other words, it was kind of a universal phenomenon. And this is not a kind of thing what happened only in this 2020. If you had observed carefully, we could see a kind of structural pattern in one way or other way in our folk tales, rituals across nations, characters or situations or movies and songs. See, when we are talking about our folk tales, how do we narrate our folk tales? No, I did my research in folk tales, so I keep talking about folk tales, and I was so much interested in folk tales. So, how do we narrate? How do we start our narrations? We start usually like once upon a time in a land, something like that. We always start. No, it's the same everywhere. Who told us to start like that? We don't know. Across the nations, across the culture, it is the same. Across the nation, across the culture, if you observe, we have a typical mother-in-law character, a harsh lady, a cruel lady, a trickster fox. The lion is attached always with kingly characters. The dog is attached with some kind of foolishness. And now we call them archetypes when we have a typical things, a copy of certain things. You keep seeing it again and again, hearing it again and again. You have archetypes, cliches, tropes. Now, if you are examining dictionary, all these three terms, archetypes, tropes, cliches, can be tied onto a similar thread, a single thread. We cannot divide it into separate. They change in the meaning in a slighter sense. In fact, cliches, you know cliches pretty easily. And the cliches are kind of repeated images, but it got a negative meaning. What do you mean by negative connotation? Now you will get tired of it easily, seeing the cliches. Whereas the tropes and the archetypes are kind of positive. You'll never get tired of it. Now you hear the A.R. Rahman's music, you love to hear it again and again. You say it is classic. Every time when he tries to bring something individual, it has its base in that old classical, the seven line, the seven sounds, the saptasaras, are the ragas behind it. I'm sorry, I'm not so into the music, but we know the ragas are basic things, and it actually whatever Rahman is producing today can be fixed into that original canvas. Now, that is what I wanted to say. Tropes and archetypes are something like that. Tropes are some popular images, popular concepts, or recurring images in one culture alone, whereas archetypes are popular images and models that appears universally. Now, for the next few minutes, let's discuss together this idea about archetype, its etymology, about its place in literature, the major proponents of this theory, the types of archetype, and how archetypes are helping in the exegesis of literature. In the last phase, if there is time, I wanted to do this. I would like to make an attempt in reading Wasteland using the situational archetypes. So let's come back to the question. What is archetype? Now, the term archetype literally means an original pattern from which copies are made. You have an original pattern, or according to the Plato's Platonic concept, you have a pure concept, a pure image, out of which you make a lot of copies. And it's only in the structure pattern or that plot structure that remains the same. It's not a 20th century concept. Archetype is not actually put forth, the whole idea is not put forth by Northrop Frye in 1950s or something. In fact, it started much earlier in the 16th century. Or the term itself, the archetype itself is actually a Greek term. It's a compound word. Archetype is actually made of two words like arche and typo. It's a Greek term. Those two are actually Greek terms. Arche means beginning, original thing. Whereas the type or typos in original form means pattern or model. So deriving from these two meanings, the two word meanings, lexical meanings, you can say archetype is a statement. It is a pattern of behavior. It's a prototype. There's a first form or a main model that other statements, the patterns of behavior, objects, they are copying, they're emulating, and sometimes they're merging. So in a simpler sense, you can say there's an original model, like what I said, like the Platonic concept, and all what we recreate or reproduced in any art form, it is a copy of that. To speak in an inductive mode, what we created is just a small copy of microcosm of the original image. So if you want to use some synonymous in an informal manner, you can say standard example. It's a basic example. It's a crude thing. It's a naive form. And what we recreated, it actually believes to embody the fundamental characters of a thing. So if you want to simplify it further, this is what actually I feel what Eliot wants to say in tradition and individual talent. When you are recreating something, when you wanted to reproduce an art form, you are not trying to recreate something new. And if you are not standing with your classic or your predecessor, you are not going to make something new here. You will be kind of outcast in the society. Now, we know we use literary criticism as a method of interpreting a text. And in 20th century, we have a lot of theories that concentrate on any of these ideas. Like when you are trying to interpret a text, we either interpret from the position of an author, or we try to see it from the text itself. We try to read the text itself. We don't look for the author, or sometimes we read it from the reader's perspective. Sometimes we read it from the culture perspective or society's perspective, and many a times we actually make culture and society itself as a text to read. So there are many methods to read literature like that. This archetypal literary criticism, when propagated by Northrop Frye, it was a proposal against the new criticism. Now there is no more structuralism, semiotics, deconstruction. Nothing has came during that period. It was that period there was only new criticism. That the new mode of interpreting text was actually popping in. And the new critics made a text-centered reading. They wanted to get the meaning from the text. They're trying to interpret the text and they wanted to get the meaning from the text. They didn't want to look for the culture, the ideas, the meanings that actually gets from outside. They read the text as the sign. They didn't want to go for the symbols outside. They didn't want to look for the author's background. They didn't want to check the period that gave birth to the text or any such details. Frye wanted actually a separate field of literary criticism. When he actually talks about making about literary criticism, he wanted to say, I don't want criticism to be a subdivision of literature. That is what we do today. We study criticism as one course or one paper. Right, in literature we say BA English language and literature, maybe in the third year or in the second year we get exposed to one paper called literary criticism, and literary criticism 1 and literary criticism 2. He said, I don't want literary criticism to be a subdivision of literature. In fact, he says that the moment you start reading the text, the moment you start trying to understand the text, moment you start trying to find meaning, you are actually criticizing the text. When you start teaching the text, you are trying to criticize the text. And again, he said he didn't want to go for the historical reading. He didn't want to go for the philosophical reading. He wanted a balanced approach, both the historical as well as the philosophical reading. So he said what is in literature is actually reflected in the society, the larger canvas of the society, the culture. And what is in society is reflected in the literature. In other words, Frye wanted to connect the present day situations, whatever you see today, whatever you are writing today, what is in your hand today, you want to connect it to the past. and then find meaning in the contemporary world. So the archetypes are there in your books, in your text. You have to find that. And then go with that archetypes, the situations, the characters, go to the past, get the meaning from that, and then find the meaning of the text in your hand. That's what he wanted to do. So, the widely accepted understanding of an archetype in literature, what I said till was lexical. So, how do you understand archetype in literature? It is that it is an image, it is a story pattern, it's a character type that recurs frequently. Evokes strong and often unconscious associations within the reader. For example, when you hear about a witch, the reader will assume that it is wicked. When you hear about a prince, you think that the prince or princess is in the distress, or there's going to be some issues. When you hear about Cinderella, you assume that there is going to be some issues with that Cinderella. She is good, but there is going to be some issues. If you look into the serials today, you'll see that, right? A lady who is always crying, and she hasn't done anything wrong for that. This is how that characters are popping up. There's an archetype. This is something what the readers expect about one character. So, in that sense, archetypal literary criticism is a critical theory that interprets a text by focusing on recurring myths and archetypes. It recurs in narratives, symbols, images, and character types in literary works. Now, the origins of archetypal criticism can be dated back to 1934 when Maud Botkin published Archetypal Patterns in Poetry. That is the title of the work, Archetypal Patterns in Poetry. But the major proponents of archetypal literary criticism are James George Frazer, Carl Jung, and Northrop Fryer. And as a discipline, its origins can be traced from, if you are studying it in more detail, if you want to know about archetypes in much detailed manner, you need to look back into the social anthropology where Frazer worked. Frazer is an anthropologist, and psychoanalyst where Carl Jung worked. And Carl Jung is a disciple of Sigmund Freud. So Fry actually, when he started, he put together all of these ideas, and then he wanted to make an archetypal literary criticism. Archetypal criticism and exegesis of the literary text gained its popularity in 1940s and 50s. However, the first influential text in this field is The Golden Bough. Probably you might have heard about it. The Golden Bough, published during the 1890 and 1915 by Frazer. Frazer, James George Frazer, is an anthropologist, and in this text, he actually identifies and compares the practices and mythological beliefs shared among the primitive religions and modern religions. So Frazer argues that the death rebirth myth present in most cultures is symbolized in terms of growing seasons and vegetations. So he says that there's a death rebirth myth in almost all the cultures, and in most cultures, that myth is actually symbolically represented using a vegetable cultivation mode. When you have a harvest, you say it is death. The death is represented by a final harvest of the autumn season. And when you have a rebirth, the mythical rebirth, the concept is actually associated with the spring season, the new cultivation. For example, if you remember the myth of Persephone, if you know the Greek Persephone character, she was forced to stay 6 months in the underworld with Hades. She was taken from her mother Demeter, and the goddess of Demeter is the goddess goddess of earth, right? She's the goddess of harvest and vegetation. So when she was taken from her mother, Demeter became sad. And when she became sad, earth actually experienced autumn and winter. When she is in the mortal realm, now Demeter was sad. We don't have a kind of vegetation, we have a kind of famine. So the people went to Hades and asked him to send this lady back to earth, Persephone back to earth. So what happened? Hades allowed Persephone to stay on earth for the next 6 months. So it's a like 6 months, 6 months period. So the next 6 months, you have summer and spring season. You have new vegetation, a rebirth. You will have enjoying the summer. So there's a death, rebirth, mythical cycle. The cycles are called mythoi. So I'll come back to this archetype, this death, rebirth cycle when we discuss about the wasteland. Now, while Fraser's work deals with mythology and archetype in material terms, Carl Jung described archetypes psychologically. According to him, archetypes are similar to instincts that govern human behavior, said by Freud, right? Your unconscious actually governs you. Now, when Freud talks about individual psyche, Carl Jung studied the psyche of a community. He says that archetypes are recurring patterns of situation, character, or symbol underlying the psyche of a society. So they are the common themes that show up in every culture of the world. The same death rebirth myth, which Fraser sees as being representative of the growing seasons and agriculture, in Jungian terms, it becomes a symbolic expression of the process taking place not in the world but in the mind. So when your ego goes to the unconscious, you say there's a death, and when it comes to back, there's a rebirth. So that is something, a cycle that is happening within your mind. Now, the first work in the area of archetypal literary criticism, as I told, is Maud Botkin's Archetypal Patterns in Poetry. And this book actually applied Jung's theories about the collective unconscious, archetypes, and primordial images to literature. However, it was only in 1950s that Northrop Frye developed this archetypal literary criticism in its purely literary terms. So that is why we actually rarely refer to Botkin when we talk about the proponents of archetypal literary criticism. We talk about Fraser, Goldenbaugh, Jung. We come back to Northrop Frye. So this Northrop Frye developed this archetypal literary criticism in its literary terms, and many a times when we talk about archetypes and archetypal criticism, we say Frye. We actually quote Frye as the last word. Now, the major work of Frye that deal with archetypes is his Anatomy of Criticism. That is actually 4 essays. And even before publishing that Anatomy of Criticism, he actually published one essay called The Archetypes of Literature. That is a precursor to this book. So Frye's idea in the essay, The Archetypes of Literature, remains largely unchanged in Anatomy of Criticism. There's nothing much change in it. So as I said before, Frye's archetypal criticism is actually a protest against the new critics and the existing mode of analyzing literary text. This archetypal criticism came before structural and semiotic studies. So you can imagine how far Frye was important and his ideas were important during that period, because there was no structuralism, there was no semiotic studies. Only thing was the new critics, and then came this interesting topic called archetypal criticism, where you are going to study more about mythical things. Frye's archetypal criticism is distinct from the methods of Fraser and Carl Jung. Frye was uninterested in the idea of unconscious, the collective unconscious put forth by Carl Jung, for he thinks that one cannot study this unknown unconscious. He was least bothered about the origin of the archetypes, like Fraser did, but he was more interested in the function of the archetypes and its effect in society. Frye wanted a new scientific method of analyzing literary text, and he put forth 4 major modes of criticism. That is what he discusses in his Anatomy of Criticism. He says about historical, ethical, archetypal, and generic. These are his 4 modes: historical, ethical, archetypal, and generic. Now, in his historical framework, he says about 2 basic categories: comedic and tragic. Each category is again subdivided. So we have comedy and romance under the comedic, and tragedy and satire or ironic and tragic. So now we have four major genres here: comedy, romance, tragedy, and satire. Now he then associates these four major genres with the Fraser seasons. And again, all these seasons are associated with narrative parallels. Now, this is what it is more important. The romance, let's start with comedy. You have comedy here. Comedy is associated with spring season. Comedy is something where the people will come together, have happiness. There is kind of a joining, a get-togetherness. So it's kind of spring season. It is associated with spring season. It is associated with a birth of a hero, a revival, a resurrection. And then comes romance. Romance is again it talks about the growth of a hero. It's in the summer season. Usually we conduct marriages. When you look at this English nations, they actually conduct marriages during this period. So romance is associated with summer. There's a culmination of life or maturity, marriage, the birth of the hero during this period. Then you have tragedy. Tragedy is associated with autumn. You have a death or fall of the protagonist. From in actually Aristotelian terms, the hero will fall from this reversal of fortune. The hero will from the fortune he will fall down. Then you have satire and irony, the fourth genre, and it is associated with winter. The hero is no more present. The hero is absent here. There is no one to save the land. There's no hero like Beowulf. There is no hero like King Arthur. There is no hero as you have seen in any of your tales of fiction. So satire is metonymized with winter on the grounds that satire is a dark genre. Satire is disillusioned and a mocking form of the other three genres. It is noted for its darkness, dissolution, the return of the chaos. You have a lot of chaos here. You have a lot of trouble, issues. The defeat, the heroic figure is no more there. He is defeated. No one can help you. That is associated with this. And historically, he again compares and says that comedy is the period like the Greek thing. And then comes the romance with the associated with Romans, and tragedies associated during the English period. Again, if you're historically dividing this English period, you'll say comedy associated with the Anglo-Saxon period. You have a romance associated much later during the Shakespearean period, and then a tragedy where everything falls down till the Victorian period, and the modern age is connected with the satire and ironical passage. Now, all these things will come back when we are talking about Wasteland. Moving on to the next session, archetypes are of different types, and it is hard to list all of them. However, all archetypes fall if you are categorizing them. We can categorize all of these archetypes into three broad categories. One is character archetype, and character archetype is the most common and important kind of archetype which the Joseph Campbell studied. The most popular characters have a universal archetype like hero, anti-hero, trickster. There are literally hundreds of different character archetypes, including the seductress, the father and the mother figure. What we actually talk about in Indian concept, Indian tradition, are all these character archetypes: the mender, the nightmare creature, etc. Then you have a lot of symbolic archetypes. They are the symbols that appear repeatedly in human culture. For example, the trees stand for nature. The fire stands for destruction. The desert becomes stand for the sterility. Water becomes the symbol of something, a new life. Then you have situational archetypes. This is what I will be discussing with Wasteland. You can actually discuss Wasteland with character archetypes or symbolic archetypes, but I'll be looking much into the situational archetypes. Now, situational archetypes are the situations that appear in multiple stories, a similar kind of situations. Examples like lost love. Whenever you say about the lost love, you know what will be the situation that is going to come. That is how we started saying in movies, we started seeing a lot of cliches. When there's a love, there's a rain. When there's a death, when there is a sad moment, there's a rain. Something like that. There's a situation that becomes an archetype. We say if you have an orphan like a Heathcliff, and that orphan is destined for greatness, we know that that is how the plot should go. That is, if the plot moves away from it, we say something is different here, something is not classical, this is not how it works. So this is what all about archetype is. I hope you might have got enough details to understand what an archetype is. It's something that is recurring in the recurring throughout the ages, the images in all the fictions. If you are going to study, you'll see this. I would like to use one aspect like the situational archetype to understand the wasteland. Before discussing Wasteland, I want to discuss situational archetype a bit more to understand this. Situational archetypes, as I said, it's about the situations or the plots. So when we are going to tell a story, the readers assume certain aspects. Say, like if I'm going to talk about the ghost story, the readers expect certain ghostly elements, like that house is unwelcoming, dark colors should be there, certain mysterious features should be there, bloodshed, owl hoots, and so on. Now, the reader thinks that these are certain situations necessary in the story structure. Even if the story doesn't go in the same mode, we expect certain things like that. Fry, in fact, talks about 11 major situational archetypes. And let's first identify which are those 11 situational archetypes, and then we'll associate it with Wasteland. There will be a quest. This is a motive that describes the search for someone, something, which, when found and brought back, will restore growth and prosperity. You will see a similar kind of quest in almost all the literature. There will be a task. That's the second one. So there's a quest, there's a task. The task, like to save the kingdom, as what Beowulf did. Or if you have seen the Lord of Rings or have read the Lord of Rings about Frodo, he got a task to save the kingdom, or to win the fair lady, to identify himself so that he may be reassumed his rightful position, or the hero must perform some nearly superhuman deed. So there's a task given to the characters. Then in the beginning, when you start reading, when you start exposed to the character, you found most of the times we'll find that the heroes are kind of innocent. So there's an initiation happening in the situation where the heroes get revealed or get mature. He gets his realization about what he is, about what he should do. The adolescent comes into his or her maturity with new awareness, the problems, along with new hope for the community. If you remember Bahubali, he has this initiation. First, he doesn't know why he is longing to go to the upper world, but he keeps doing it. Know that there is an innocence, and at one point of the time, he gets to know all what is happening there. There's a realization. There will be a journey. The journey that sends the hero in search of for some truth or information necessary to restore fertility in the kingdom, necessary to restore happiness back in the kingdom. Thus, in Odyssey or in the Canterbury Tales, in Aeneid, in the Fellowship of the Lord of the Rings, actually you hear that there's a journey destined for the hero, the character. There'll also be a fall. This archetypes actually describes a descent from a higher to a lower state of being. It is during this fall that you experience a loss of innocence, your bliss. The fall is accompanied by an expulsion from a kind of paradise, what you have been, as a penalty for disobedience. the mortal transgression. So if you are looking back into the stories, you'll see similar situations, right? There's a death and rebirth. That is another situational characteristic archetype, the most common of all situation archetype. This motif grows out of the parallel between cycle of nature and cycle of life. This morning and springtime represent birth, youth, rebirth, while evening and winter suggest old age or death. You have nature versus mechanist world. That's the situation. And you actually ends to say nature is good, while technology and society are often evil. That's what all your new movies say. The Walden movie, The Terminator, the Jurassic Park. Technology is bad. Technology brings problems in the society. You also have battle between good and evil. That's the eighth character, the eighth situation. There's a battle, and that battle is mostly between good and evil, the two primal forces. Mankind shows eternal optimism that at one point the good will triumph over evil, despite whatever be the odds, despite all the great odds. If you remember Lord of the Rings, the forces of Sauron and those in the Middle Earth, yeah, they get destroyed at the end, and the good actually wins. There's an unhealable wound. This wound is either physical or psychological and cannot be healed fully. This wound also indicates a loss of innocence. These wounds always ache and often drive the sufferer to desperate measure, like Frodo's shoulder. And keep telling this idea. There's a wound if you're looking back to Odysseus, if you're looking back to Oedipus. Everyone got a wound that actually aches the reader. There's a ritual, the actual ceremonies that initiate experiences that will mark his rite of passage into another state. The importance of ritual rites cannot be overstressed as they provide clear signposts for the character's role in the society as well. So, throughout the works, you see rituals like weddings, baptism, coronations. If you see a ritual, you know what it is related to. That's a situation. Many times you have the hero with a magic weapon. This magic weapon symbolizes the extraordinary quality of the hero. If you remember Avengers, the Thor has a hammer, no one else can pick it up because no one else can wield the weapon or use it to its full potential. It is usually given by a mentor figure. So these are 11 situational archetypes. Sorry. So quest, the task, there's an initiation, there's a journey, there's a fall, death and rebirth, nature versus mechanistic world, battle between the good and evil, the unhealable wound, the ritual, the magic weapon. So around 11 situational archetypes I have listed. I would like to move on to The Wasteland. It's a poem written by T.S. Eliot, Thomas Stearns Eliot, and it was published first in 1922 in the Criterion. Now, many times I have heard students saying, why Eliot wrote such a poem? Why such a huge celebration for this particular poem in the modern era where you don't understand anything? Even I myself have said many times, he actually took a lot of things from different works. He put it together and there is no plagiarism charged against him. Now, it is true that to understand the poem is a tiresome task. For a long period, I kept this poem, Wasteland, closed because I could never crack the puzzle. Thinking that I'm not going to reopen this text again. However, it was like one of my friends asked me to help him with this poem recently, and I sat with the poem again, maybe after a decade without much hope, because it's a puzzle. We cannot help it. Because Eliot himself wanted the poem to be difficult, and it is that difficulty that is added to its total meaning. Fortunately, this time the poem revealed its puzzle to me, and I started loving it. I felt like I missed something for a long time and I wanted to share it. That is why when Vignesh and Ronald approached me to give a talk, I thought about, okay, I'll talk about Wasteland. So, without much saying, let's go into this. When Eliot published this poem, The Wasteland, things were not so good for England. If you are observing the history, much worse things are actually waiting. So, from Victorian era, the people of England are actually grasped with kind of fear that they are going to lose the control over the world, which they had for a long time. For past 800 years, maybe from 1066, as a point they formed as a nation, from the point they formed as a nation, till this Victorian era, they were enjoying a kind of superiority in this world. Now they are going to lose it. America is gaining the power. So if you wanted to look into the poems during the Victorian era, actually you see this. They wanted some hero to help them, maybe like Beowulf or Odysseus. Remember the Ulysses of Tennyson? So Tennyson is making Ulysses to speak to them and telling that there is no time to rest. There is something more to do. Now, things after World War became more worst. Like it became worst actually. America got the control. England lost most of its colonies. Even in India and Africa, everywhere, slowly the independence fights are gaining strength. After the World War, the women had to work to earn for their livelihood. Most men who took part in war didn't see it as an adventurous effort, as they sang in their ballads. Like if you examine the Anglo-Saxon period and the songs during that, they actually celebrated the battles. But after the World War One, they found that war are not that easy thing. War is not just an adventurous thing. It is something beyond. They saw the dark side of it. People started questioning their life, existence. Why am I living here? What is the point of living here? Eliot wrote this poem in this scenario. Wasteland, though he talked about England, it could be anywhere, any other land where people find no point in living, where it is people think it is better to get died, where death is kind of a blessing. Now, Eliot is asking his reader to make a visit to a land, a wasteland. You have to think like that. The reader is accompanied with a narrator, a female voice. If you examine closely, Eliot starts the poem with a ritual. Remember the situational archetype, a ritual? So the Eliot starts this poem, The Wasteland, with a ritual. If you have read this poem, The Wasteland, it doesn't start with the first part, the burial of the dead. It starts with an epigraph. You're going to see the Sibyl of Cumae, the great prophetess. So that is a ritual that was in practice from the Greek period. Before you start a journey, you go to a prophetess and ask for a blessing. Sibyl of Cumae is a great prophetess. It is she who guided Aeneid through Hades. The reader is going to see Sibyl to ask her guidance throughout the journey in Wasteland. But all what we see is a Sibyl who is too old and is hanging upside down. She says she sees the world in an upside down manner. She wishes to die. That is a great wish. She thinks that if I die, that is the greatest blessing. I don't want to live anymore. See, the whole poem is going to be structured in an ironic manner. If you remember that the fourth category, the fourth genre, it's an irony. You are going to a Sibyl asking for blessing, for guidance to move through this poem, moves through this wasteland, to take a journey in this wasteland. You see a prophetess who wants to die. And once you enter this wasteland, everyone you meet says the same thing. It is better to die. Let's get died. There's no point in living this wasteland. The moment you enter, you are actually greeted with the title, The Burial of the Dead. The title remains another ritual in both Christian as well as in Hindu manner, in both Western and in Eastern philosophy. In Christian manner, it's actually a prayer. When we are burying our dead people, we give this prayer, the burial of the dead. It's taken from the prayer book. When it comes to the Eastern philosophy, there's a burial of fertility gods. No, as Fraser said, death is symbolized with harvest. And if you look into our culture, you have to bury our fertility gods underwater in most of our cultures after the harvest. And then we pay rites during the spring season and bring them back to the life. So you then start the journey. And in line 43, the reader is actually meeting another prophetess, Madame Sosostris. So the ritual to meet a prophetess, whenever you go and see a prophetess, whenever you meet a Madame Sosostris, the famous clairvoyant, the foreteller, you go and show her your hands to her to see your fortune in this wasteland, thinking that she could prophesy something good. But ironically, she can't speak anything because she got a bad cold. She keeps sneezing. So, and she gives you a fortune card. What is that fortune card? It's the drowned Phoenician soldier. But she says, fear death by water. Your fortune is death by water. If you're getting death, if you're getting drowned like the Phoenician soldier, it is good. But then she says, fear death by water. She also says she can't find the hanged man. Remember the hanged man? Hanged man is the hero, the Christ, to save you from the situations. He says that I can't find the hanged man. I do not find the hanged man in all my cards. So there's an issue. You are not going to meet the savior in the midst of it. Now, the first line of the poem reminds the reader the archetype of natural cycle. It says that April is the cruelest month. That's how we start, and then we go back to Canterbury Tales. Like the archetype of April says it is the month of spring. It's the month of new birth. The people will come together, share happiness, goes for pilgrimages, as in Canterbury Tales. But in Wasteland, it is filled with irony. Historically, modern age is drawn parallel to the genres like irony and satire, as I told. And in Wasteland, there is none to come together in April. There are no more journeys where you could tell tales endlessly. There are no more friends here. There are no friends who could come and sit and chat. Poet says it is better to remain in winter. It is better to remain under snow, death. April is unwelcomed because people of this land are incapable of participating in the process of renewal of the earth. They think that it is better if the winter continues for a period. If the winter is not bringing that memory and desire, stirring the dull roots again. They prefer the cold of winter because they cannot endure the pangs of rebirth and the fear. They fear the possibility of resurrection. So we are in a city now, we are starting a journey in a city now where everything is good if it is dead. But nothing is dead here. Nothing is given justice here. We are forced to walk through this. I quote the line 60, unreal city. Under the brown fog of a winter dawn, a crowd flowed over London Bridge, so many. And all those who are walking with sighs short and infrequent, their breath is like that. It's kind of sigh. Short, infrequent, they are walking like that. And with each man fixed his eye before his feet, they are not keeping their head up. And by the end of that passage, he says, even the dead bodies, you are in a land where the dead bodies are not given justice. It is not given a proper burial. You start with the ritual of burying of the dead, but you end with saying that corpse you planted last year in your garden, the line, I quote the line 71, has it begun to sprout? Has it got the justice of getting decayed? Will it bloom this year? Or has the sudden frost disturbed its bed? or keep that dog far hence, that friend to men, or with his nails he will dig it up again. So the death is not going to get a proper burial. So, in this land of unreality, wind, death, sterility, where you find no trees, where you find no water, where nothing grows. Moving on, we see there are no trees. It's a desert without water, not even a sound of water. Because when you come to the last section, what the thunder said, I quote, if there were water and no rock, and also water, a spring, a pool among the rock at least. If there was sound of water only, not the cicada, and dry grass singing, but the sound of water over a rock, where the hermit thrush sings in the pine trees, drip, drop, drip, drop, 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 but there is no water. You are in a land where you find no water. In the third section, in the fire sermon, he remains the readers that when you are actually going through this journey in the wasteland, when you come to a place, he says that this land was not like this before. In the third section, he says that it had a river where Elizabeth and Leicester got married. Remember, the Spencer sang Sweet Thames, run softly till I end my song. He made that romantic songs here. Eliot ironically says it is no more the same. Now, you have a task here. As a reader, you have a task here. That is where the myth comes, the archetypes come into the play. The idea of wasteland and how to make it fertile again is an idea that ran in many myths, many fiction. You have a damaged land, you have a damaged area, and the hero will make it back fertile. The two stories and characters that kept recurring in this poem, throughout the poem, I found, are the Jessie Weston's tale on the quest for the Holy Grail and the sacrificial journey of the Christ, the biblical story, who could bring life to earth, which was lost due to the fall of man, fall of Adam. Now, if you read the third section, the fire sermon, the man who tries to fish in the dull canal is the fisher king. He has lost his power to procreate. That's how you understand this mythical point. He got an unhealable wound. The curse of his land can be removed only by a questing knight who asks the meanings of various symbols which are presented to him in the course of his visit to a castle. Now, in Wasteland, the reader is the questing knight. We have to undergo a journey. Unless there's a knight who is innocent, who asks the question, this fisher king is not going to get healed. The land of fisher king never gets fertile. And in Wasteland, you will never see a knight like that. It is the reader, you, who should do that. You should not fear the death by water. It is better to get died, but you are a hero. You are not supposed to do that. We have to undergo a journey in this wasteland. Remember the archetype, the journey of the hero? The knight is innocent in the first part. And then there is an initiation, there's a growth. All I'm taking is this archetypes. A growth. There's a realization of realities. When you started this journey, you didn't know that you are going to be the knight. You are going to be the Christ. That you will have a quest and the task to fulfill. But in the third section, in the fire sermon, there is a meeting with Tiresias. The reader is given a vision. The reader realizes the issue of the wasteland. The poet then in the last section again talks in what the thunder said. He actually asked the Prajapati, the god of gods. He calls the Prajapati from the east to come and give a sermon that represents the sermons of the Christ and Buddha. And he says that only if we are ready to give, he says actually datta and damyada. That's how we interpret it. Only if we are ready to give, Only if we are ready to be kind and have self control that we could make this wasteland fertile. Only when Christ gives his life in Gethsemane, man will have a redemption from his faith. The earth will become fertile again. Only when you have a knight who completed his quest of Holy Grail, the Fisher King will get healed and the land of Fisher King will become fertile again. Only when, if you are going to the fourth section, you see a sailor who gets died, who gets drowned in water. His name is Phlebas. And he's a man who's tall and handsome, who looks after the money, who thinks that money is everything. And then the poet wants us, don't be like him. Only when we live the life of the Phlebas, we say no to it. The sailor who always thought about fortunes, we could be a hero like the Christ or the knight to change the situation of the wasteland. That magic weapon is in your hand. To change the sterility of wasteland is in the hands of the reader who is ready to ask question, who is ready to fulfill the quest of the land. One who actually doesn't want to ask any question will not get the meaning of this poem. Thank you. Hi, Ron. I guess your mic is muted.
Session. It was really interesting, and I think we will not see Wasteland. We'll see Wasteland in a new way, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. So, participants, if you have any questions, you can just post it in the chat box. So, as the participants are asking their questions, actually, your ma'am had already asked, how can this be associated with Canterbury Tales? You already mentioned, but would you like to clarify on that?
Um, in Canterbury Tales, actually, Chaucer is talking about a pilgrimage period, the April. So his fight when Canterbury Tales, if you are opening it, you'll see that April is actually one of the best month because April is the summer season or the spring season where the people can come together. You can go for a pilgrimage. You'll have time with everyone, happiness. That is what the people think for a long time. April is a month of happiness. April can bring regeneration in your life, get togetherness in your life. But Eliot says that coming together is no more bringing any happiness here. After the World War, if people are coming together, they may have to tell, my father is no more here. My father got died in the war. Or one another person will say, my brother got died in the war. When the people coming together, they'll have this sad stories to tell. Many may have to tell, I didn't even get the dead body to give a proper burial. There's a lot of memories that actually makes April a cruel month. You don't want to come together. If it is winter, as we say, if it was continuing lockdown, we could sit inside the home. We don't have to see anybody again. There are people like that saying. It's better to avoid people and sit inside the home because I can actually avoid a lot of questions. When Canterbury Tale starts, there's a journey, there's a quest. People are actually going for a journey, telling that if I'm going for this journey, I'll pay penance for all my sins, what I did in the past. And if I make a homage to this pilgrimage, if I go to this church, if I pay homage, proper rites, I'll get healed. My sins are getting washed away. And you'll have happiness in your life. You did something to save your life. In Wasteland, you will never have such an incident. That's what Eliot says. There's no one who is going to help you. There's no pilgrimage home. There is no place that you can go because the church is no more working. The religion is no more working after the Victorian era, in England especially. There is no one to fill in hope in your life. All what you have is a lot of memories. You remember, if you are going to read the next line, there is actually a talk about the cousins who says that when we were children, we were at the Archduke's. My cousin, he took me out on a sled and I was frightened. He was a man and I was a woman. So I was frightened. He said, Mary, Mary, hold on tight. And down we went in the mountains. There you feel free. We had actually such good times in April. I read much of the night and go south in the winter. Today I can't do that, to go to the cousin's house because the cousin is no more. He got died in the war. So April is going to bring me a lot of memories back to my heart. Once upon a time we had all these things. Now I'm not having it. That's how Eliot is connecting Wasteland to Canterbury Tales. But I connect it with this journey and quest with the archetypal. You can actually read everything here. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Uh, Actually, the other question is also about Canterbury Tales and Wasteland, but I feel that he's written Murder in the Cathedral. They all kind of go back to Canterbury Tales, isn't it? So he was kind of inspired by Chaucer in certain ways because his drama is also about Thomas. I mean Saint Becket, right? So
See, Eliot is a person living this apart, archetype and archetypal literary criticism, that came much later. I mean, Eliot wrote this in 1920s, and the archetypal literary criticism, as a mode of criticizing the text, came in 1950s, 1940s, and 50s. But Eliot is a person who actually wanted heritage, tradition. So he always looks back to the age-old people. He didn't like, okay, I'm going to write something new here. He always stands with the people who wrote before him. He took the literature from them, he read it. He said that if I'm going to stand away from them, they are not going to appreciate me. My work won't be a part of this old classical literature. Now, if you want to understand why he goes back to this Chaucer or Spenser, if you are reading this Wasteland, you have references to all of this Shakespeare, all of those classical writers, except for Milton or some people like that whom he didn't like. Most of the classical writers, especially with Greek authors, he goes back and read them. That's because he is a man who talks more for tradition. He says that if my literature, he is a man who wants to be a classical writer, who wants to be counted among the classical writers. So he was born in America. And when America stood for liberty, fraternity, and said no to this elite class, he said no to their citizenship and came to Britain, took a citizenship over here, thinking that he could be part of the elite class. That is the reason why he is making. That's another thing. That he is making all his works difficult so that his works will be read by the elite class. Now, that is also there. So he thinks that unless and until I am part of those traditional writers, I'm taking the knowledge and I am adding unto it, I'm no more a writer. If I'm writing something new, my readers won't understand. That's what he says. If I'm writing something new, which my predecessors never said, which my predecessors says for first, which I'm going to say something new, uh, people may not understand it because my communication won't be proper. That's what he says. So, for example, this is a mouse. Now, I want to call it bottle. If people for a long period calls it as a mouse, but if I am going to call it as a bottle, And throughout this lecture, if I say, I have a bottle and I meant this, will you understand? Will the message be clear to you? It won't, right? So that's what, in typical way, I could say what Eliot meant. If you are moving away from traditional writers and saying something new, Eliot says you won't be accepted in that literary circle. So Eliot considers himself as a person who is standing, he is going to run a race, and all your predecessors, all the writers before you are standing in a circle, and they are looking into you. Only if you are feel that you are part of them, they will accept you. Your literature be part of their work, into a classic work. Otherwise, they'll say, he is writing something new, we won't understand, that is not something part of our tradition, our culture, so let us say no to him. Eliot was afraid of it. He says that uh, your work will become classic only when you are part of them. That's what. So that's the reason why he goes back to Chaucer, Spencer, Shakespeare. Whenever he writes anything, he goes back to all those age old things. And that is a protest against the romantics, if you are looking much deeper. That was a protest against the romantics who said, let's write something new, let's write something original out of nowhere. He says that doesn't work here.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your wonderful explanation. It was a awesome presentation, and we learned a lot. So we are really thankful for the session. And as I already mentioned, we can see Wasteland in a new way, and it's actually inspiring me to go and read it back. Because as you mentioned, in college we would just say like, "Oh, this is a very difficult work," but now maybe perhaps we can give it another try. So I
Yeah.
take this time to thank Vignesha for the technical support, and also for inviting ma'am, and also Beulah ma'am for copy editing. Thank you, and thank you for all the participants. We have posted the feedback links. Please complete the feedback links. Only for half an hour it will be open. You'll be receiving your e-certificates. So thank you, ma'am. Thank you for sharing your time with us. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me this wonderful opportunity in INLIT Academy. Thank you.
Thank you.